Thank you so much for your attention. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. And thank you all so much for being here. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the CNI 2025 CNI Spring Membership Meeting here in Milwaukee. This is CNI's 70th meeting. Yes, please. I'm really amazing. I'm Diane Goldenberg-Hart, CNI's Assistant Executive Director, and not the face you normally see opening a CNI meeting. As you probably already know, Cliff Lynch, CNI's Executive Director, was unable to join us in person for health reasons. I know we will all miss having Cliff here and his wife, Cecilia. And they are both so sorry to miss seeing you all in person. But he is watching this session. Hi, Cliff. And we're so happy. We're so happy that he's able to join us. He's also planning to participate in the closing plenary tomorrow afternoon, which is also wonderful. I'd also like to say that even though Cliff won't be here in person, that doesn't mean you won't be able to speak with him. We plan to have a laptop set up at the reception this evening with Cliff on Zoom. So please stop by and say hello to him at the reception. So now, since he can't do it himself in person, Cliff has asked me to welcome you all on his behalf. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and being here. At this particularly challenging time for the higher education and library communities, it really is especially good and important to be together. I want to extend a special welcome to a few folks, to our international members and guests. I know how difficult international travel can be, and we really appreciate the extra effort you've made to join us. To the ARL Fellows who have joined us, we are delighted that you could be here with us today as well. And to our newest member, Google Books, thank you for being a part of our community as well. Please join me in welcoming them to CNI. We have a rich, diverse program planned with timely and engaging presentation topics and ample opportunities for engagement on some of the most pressing issues facing our community. As usual, we'll have generous break time to connect with each other informally. As Cliff always says, and boy is it true this time, there truly is so much to discuss. And we know that you're all eager to do so. The most up-to-date information is online on our online schedule through sched.com. I would like to note that we have had a room change. All the sessions that were originally scheduled for Executive AB have been moved downstairs to the Lakeshore Ballroom. So we'll have rounds in this ballroom, we'll have rounds on the other side of registration, and then we'll have a third set of rounds going on downstairs. We have put up signs, we'll be directing traffic, we've updated the online schedule, of course, and we are always here to help you find your way should you need that help. If any other changes should occur, we will post them on the message board near where you picked up your badge. And of course, we will keep the online schedule updated. So in just a minute, I will hand over the microphone to Andrew Pace, ARL Executive Director, for an update on the CNI leadership transition. But before I do that, I'd like to take just a moment to make a very special announcement. As you know, as you probably have heard, and what Andrew will be speaking about, CNI Director Cliff Lynch will be retiring this summer. To mark the occasion, and to recognize and document only some of all that Cliff has contributed to our community. It's my privilege to announce the forthcoming publication of a Festschrift in Cliff's honor. Guest edited by none other than Joan Lippincott, CNI Associate Executive Director Emerita. The collection of essays by just a wonderful group of authors, some of Cliff's closest colleagues and collaborators from over the years, will be published this summer as a special issue of the journal Portal, Libraries and the Academy. I'm also very pleased to let you know that it will be available open access through Project Muse. Here on the slide, you can see the contributors' names. We're also putting out some flyers at the registration table with more information about that volume. I'm mindful of the time. I have many thank yous, but I will restrict myself to just a very few. I want to note that this has been a secret project. Cliff had no idea that we were doing this. It's been ongoing for months, but we did tell him about 10 days ago. So I'm really grateful to all of you who kept the secret. And my most profound gratitude to everyone who continues to work so hard to make this publication a reality. In particular, I'd like to recognize the contributors for documenting this history through their wonderful stories and anecdotes. Our partners at Johns Hopkins University Press and Portal, and to the core team who is still working really hard to bring it all together. Paige Pope of CNI, Nancy Marin of Blue Sky to Blueprint, and Joan Lippincott. Most of all, my deepest thanks go to the inspiration behind the project, Cliff Lynch. And now with that, I would like to hand over the podium to Andrew Pace for an update on the leadership transition.
Thanks, Dan, and really great to be part of that Festschrift. Really looking forward to seeing the finished work. My name is Andrew Pace. As you heard, I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Research Libraries, but for today's context, I am the CNI Executive Director Search Committee Chair. Thank you, Diane, and once again, my thanks to Clifford for sharing some of this plenary time to come before you and update you on the CNI Executive Director search. Somehow it's no less daunting to talk about Cliff's successor when he's online than if he's sitting right next to me. As we know, we cannot replace Cliff. We can only identify his successor. A daunting task, but one made easier by an engaged membership, a devoted staff, and many active stakeholders. I'm going to use this time to summarize our work so far and to field any questions that you might have. After Clifford shared his retirement and emeritus status plans with John O'Brien of EDUCAUSE and myself, we wanted to lead a pre-search review of CNI that included members of the CNI Steering Committee, the CNI staff, and the membership itself. Doing this through a lens of leadership transition would help us position the search for Cliff's successor. We enlisted the help of the ARL board and CNI Steering Committee to conduct interviews with key staff of the entire steering committee and to survey the CNI membership. The survey results, which I shared at the last December's meeting, included responses from over 180 members, roughly half of the membership. Once again, I'd like to thank Susan Parker from the University of British Columbia, now former ARL board member, also Sarah Shreves from the University of Utah, and Jen Stringer at the Getty Institute, both from the steering committee. John O'Brien from EDUCAUSE could not be with us this week, but wanted to be sure to also extend his thanks to the review team and the membership. This group worked quickly and efficiently to produce a report of the internal CNI review. This is also why the search itself did not officially launch until 2025. It was not for any lack of preparation. Before I update you on the status of the search, I wanted to share a quick summary of the report itself. Oops. The interviews and member survey were instrumental to the team. The report highlights a commitment to continuity while indicating areas of growth and transformation. As you might expect, It calls for careful and continued balance between operational excellence and strategic planning, as well as balance between nimble reaction to emerging technologies and the scholarly rigor for which CNI is known. And importantly, the report highlights alignment between member priorities and steering committee recommendations regarding governance, inclusion, and community building. The report also indicated a strong appetite for more partnership, both at individual institutions and between institutions. The review team agreed that the primary use of the report would be to serve as an instrument in the hiring of a new executive director for CNI. And to some extent, it will serve as a starting point for that new executive director. It is not a blueprint or a roadmap, however. It raises issues and questions without editorial recommendations from the authors of the report. Individual interviewees and survey respondents were unrestrained, I like to say, by fundamental organizational concerns such as budget, staffing, and consensus building. Moreover, the membership recommendations are not fully vetted. There were a lot of good recommendations from the membership, but consensus on those ideas has not been attained. Next steps from this review will be in the hands of the new executive director and the steering committee. Nevertheless, the review team agreed that the candor, blue sky thinking, and clearer view of the status quo would enrich the opportunities presented to candidates. Before we get to any questions, I want to remind you all that the search committee shown here, the search committee's conversations and deliberations are confidential. I want to keep this process as transparent as I can while also ensuring that it is ethically above reproach. I'm incredibly appreciative to this group and their dedication. Many search committee members are here at this meeting, so if you see them, please thank them for their service. I don't know if they want to raise their hands and wave them around a little bit as well, so thank you. We have a lot of responsibility as a committee. It's also a hard group to schedule, as you might imagine. So appreciative for the online and asynchronous work of this group, who had just this humble request to review and finalize the position description, to leverage their professional networks to help build a candidate pool. Many of you helped with that as well. To develop the evaluation criteria, review the applications and conduct screenings, participate in finalist candidate interviews, and developing strengths and weaknesses for finalist candidates before a decision is made. This is our timeline, probably fast by academic standards, but no less thorough or expertly executed by a great committee and staff. Again, my thanks to the committee's flexibility, candor, and commitment to this process. It is an evaluative process. There's been a lot of consensus building, a lot of discussion. It has been taken seriously and openly, and everyone has been quite dedicated to the task. I won't be sharing any specifics about the pool, other than that the pool is robust. I'm quite optimistic for a positive conclusion to the search. And with that, I will see if anyone has any questions or comments for me. And if you don't in real time, my email is on the screen. I'm pretty easy to reach. And I'll be here for the whole meeting too. Any questions? Can't see if anybody's getting up or if any hands are up. Okay, great. So with that, I would like to introduce our introducer. Thank you to Don Waters, who will come up and introduce some very important people to our field. Don?
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege for me to stand here before you in Clifford's Place and to introduce CNI's 2025 Paul Evan Peters Award winners. Paul, as you may know, was the founding executive director of CNI. He served from 1990 until his untimely death in 1996. After his death, EDUCAUSE, the Association of Research Libraries, and CNI established an award in Paul's honor to to commemorate his vision that CNI would encourage the transformative use of network-based information and technology. The award recognizes and celebrates long-lasting, essential contributions that have helped realize that vision. There are brochures available on the registration table and on the CNI website detailing the stellar group of previous award winners. The list contains many names that you will surely recognize, and for those of you who have been coming to CNI meetings for a while, you've likely heard talks from a number of them. This year, we have given the award to Victoria Reich and David Rosenthal for their development of locks. Lots of copies keeps stuff safe. Thanks to Vicki and David, Locks has become a central part of our conceptual, technical, and organizational infrastructure for digital preservation. Conceptually, the name Locks and the slogan it represents, lots of copies keep stuff safe, captures the essence of preservation. In the pre-digital age, preservation depended on the redundancy of many libraries having copies of published works. If a copy was lost, a reader could turn, perhaps at some cost, to a copy elsewhere. This redundancy depended on the copyright principle of first sale. As Cliff noted in his plenary talk at our last meeting, the original sin of publishing in the digital age is that it depends on licensing, which takes first sale and its preservation benefits out of play. The technical brilliance of Locks is that it offers a way out of this copyright dilemma. Portico, the other main preservation solution that we have developed as a community, relies on a centralized repository of licensed source files of published works. Locks offers an alternative by implementing a highly resilient, decentralized, error-checking consensus mechanism that stores web-based as well as licensed files and ferrets out missing or corrupted copies and automatically replaces or fixes them with copies elsewhere in the system. Of course, Locks is not the only example of an error-checking consensus mechanism. Bitcoin and blockchains are others. As anyone who has heard or read David's scathing commentaries here or at CNI meetings or elsewhere on the topic of Bitcoin and blockchain, the difference between the mechanism that underlies them and that which underlies Locks are quite vast and attest to the elegance, trustworthiness, and resilience of Locks as a technical system. The technical requirements of Locks also have some specific organizational requirements. Libraries and publishers must have skin in the game in the form of locally maintained servers that house the content and participate in the error-checking process. Over the years, there have been debates about what is the minimum number of copies needed to keep stuff safe. Whatever the number, the accomplishment of Locks is that it has met the organizational challenges of recruiting and maintaining participants and supporters. I believe that Locks became self-sustaining financially in 2007, and not long ago, Locks passed another key organizational landmark. It has survived and indeed thrives as leadership passed into new hands when the founders, David and Vicki, retired. Cliff asked me to take his place here in part because of my experience as a program officer at the Mellon Foundation, which supported Locks through several rounds of funding from 2000 through 2016. In my interactions with David and Vicki, I have found them professionally to be brilliant, persistent, dedicated, and responsive advocates for libraries and the preservation of networked information. Personally, they are uncommonly kind and generous, each with a rich sense of joy and humor. They are immensely deserving of this first couple, as the first couple to receive the Paul Evan Peters Award. I'm sure you will agree as you hear them speak. Please welcome David and Vicki.
All right. So first, thank you to Don and Cliff, wherever you are. We are extremely grateful to the Paul Evan Peters Award Committee, CNI, ARL, and EDUCAUSE, and to Microsoft and Xerox who helped to endow this award. We are honored and astonished by this award, honored because it is the premier award in the field, and astonished because we left the field more than 7 years ago to take up our new full-time gig as grandparents. The performance metrics are tough, but it's a fabulous gig. This talk will be mostly historical. David will discuss the technology's design and some lessons we learned deploying it. But first, I will talk about our goals when more than a quarter century ago, we walked into Michael Keller's office and pitched the idea that eventually became the LOX program. Mike gave us 3 instructions. Don't cost me any money. Don't get me into trouble. Do whatever you want. We succeeded in each of these. That the program is still going is thanks to many people. Snowden Becker, who might be here today. Yay, Snowden! Okay. Snowden, who is here today, represents a much larger team who worked tirelessly to sustain the program. Many others helped along the way. Michael Lesk, then at NSF, and Don Waters, then at the Mellon Foundation, provided essential funding. This slide attempts to thank everyone, but we're sure we've left people out. It was really a very long time ago. So let's get started. Over the centuries, libraries developed a dual role. By building collections, they provided current readers with access to information. They exercised stewardship over these collections to safeguard future readers' access. Libraries transitioned from the digital world over a couple of decades. In the mid-1980s, the Library of Congress experimented with readers accessing journals on 12-inch optical media. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee's first web browser accessed a page from his first web server. 2 years later, the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center put the first web page online, and people started thinking about how this new publishing medium would impact the community. You won't be surprised. An early effort came in 1993 when our own Cliff Lynch wrote a 105-page report for the Federal Office of Technology Assessment. Cliff's report was wide-ranging and insightful. In particular, he noted the change from the first sale doctrine legal framework to a publisher and library-specific contract written by the publisher's lawyers. He pointed out that the challenge made future readers' access completely dependent upon continued payment and the publisher's whims, thus blocking libraries from fulfilling their critical stewardship role. In 1995, I was part of the small team that developed Stanford's Highwire Press. Highwire was the first web publishing platform for academic journals, and by then, the problems Cliff identified impacting library stewardship role had become painfully obvious. At the time, I attended a lot of conferences. A frequent discussion topic was the ramifications of libraries transitioning from content ownership to content access. Many highly placed librarians thought the change was great. No more building collections, no more stewardship responsibility. I strongly disagreed. Hiking with David after one such conference, I described how stewardship worked in the paper world and how it didn't in the web world. His response was, I can build a system that works the way paper does. David's and my goal was to model the way paper worked, to provide librarians with an easy, familiar, affordable way to build and steward traditional collections that were migrating from paper to online. Libraries fulfill their stewardship role when future access is ensured. Stewardship occurs when libraries take possession of and manage cultural and intellectual assets. We thought it vital for libraries to maintain their stewardship role in the scholarly information ecosystem. We didn't want them to become simply convenient places to work and drink coffee. Stewardship matters for at least 3 reasons. Stewardship protects privacy when librarians fight for their patrons' rights. All people have a right to privacy. Librarians should safeguard the privacy of all library use. 2. Stewardship protects ownership transfer when content is acquired. The first sale doctrine is pivotal. It enables the business of libraries. It enables libraries to maintain and circulate knowledge. First sale ensures that the public, especially future generations, benefit from today's and yesterday's work of literature, science, and culture. And 3, stewardship resists censorship when there are multiple copies under multiple stewards. Today, book banning is on the rise. Librarians are being forced to remove items from circulation. Content ownership ensures materials can't be erased from view without detection. Stewardship of banned materials allows librarians to choose whether to safeguard these materials for future readers. Government documents are, and always have been, in the crosshairs of censors. I'll mention 4 efforts providing countervailing forces. First, the U.S. Docs/LOCKSS Network. The Government Publishing Office produces and distributes government documents. In the paper world, the Federal Depository Library Program distributed documents to over 1,000 libraries across the nation. To recall documents, the governments had to contact the librarians and ask them to withdraw the materials. It was a transparent process. This is a sample of withdrawn federal documents pretty recently. Online, there were no censorship guardrails. In 2008, a small group of librarians formed the U.S. Docs/LOCKSS Network. This program is a digital instantiation of the U.S. Federal Depository Library Program. In partnership with the Government Publishing Office, participating libraries have recreated the distributed, transparent, censor-resistant nature of the depository program. This is a sample of volumes released this February to the U.S. Docs/LOCKSS Network. Second, the Canadian Government Information Digital Preservation Network. It consists of 11 academic libraries that use Archive-It, an internet archive service, to collect all Canadian federal documents. The collected documents are then moved from the Internet Archive into a local LOCKSS networks for distributed safekeeping. Third, the end-of-term archives. This partnership captures U.S. government websites at the end of presidential administrations. With this last administrative change, thousands of federal web pages and data sets have been taken offline. Federal websites hold information important to every corner of a university. The end-of-term archive is an extraordinarily important resource. Oddly, only 2 universities partner with Archive-It to do this work: Stanford and the University of North Texas. Last, there are many efforts to capture U.S. data sets. The Data Rescue Project serves as a clearinghouse. The community recently relearned a lesson history failed to teach. Digital preservation's biggest threat is insider attack. In recent months, an unknown number of critical government databases are gone or altered. The antidote to insider attack is multiple copies under multiple stewards. In Locke's language, let's make it easy to find some of the copies, but hard to find all of the copies. I want to say a few words about sustainability. We worked very hard to make the LOCKSS program sustainable. Don Waters, then at the Mellon Foundation, awarded Locks a matching grant to transition from grant funding to the Red Hat model of free software and paid support. Funding a program like Locks is difficult. The Locks program reinstates stewardship and enables libraries as memory organizations. This is a hard sell. Librarians spend scarce resources to support current readers, spending them to ensure materials are available to tomorrow's readers, not so much. While fundraising fluctuates, costs are steady. To ensure stability, we accumulated reserves by having a very lean staff and being stingy with salaries. And then along came Clocks, where publishers took the lead to establish a community-run archive that implements library values. In 2006, a handful of publishers, notably the late Karen Hunter from Elsevier, suggested a partnership between libraries and publishers to form a community-run archive. In 2008, after a pilot funded by the founding archive libraries, contributing publishers, and the Library of Congress, the Clocks Archive went into production. Identical copies of archive content are held in 11 libraries worldwide: Scotland, Australia, Japan, Germany, Canada, and 6 in the United States. This international footprint ensures content is safe from shifting ideologies or nefarious players. As in all Locks networks, if a bad actor tries to remove or change content, the technology warns humans to investigate. The Clocks founding librarians and publishers unanimously agreed that when archived content becomes unavailable, it will be hosted from multiple sources, open access. An example: Heterocycles was an important chemistry journal. Established in 1973, it abruptly ceased publication in 2023 after 50 years. Inexplicably, the journal also disappeared from the publisher's website. Subscribers had no access. The content was unavailable from anywhere. Fortunately, the entire run of the Heterocycles journal was archived in Clocks. In June 2024, 2 Clocks archive libraries, the University of Edinburgh and Stanford University, each made all 106 volumes open access on the web. The Clocks archive is governed equally by publishers and librarians in true community spirit. However, publishers provide the bulk of financial support, contributing 70% of incoming funds. Libraries contribute only 30%. Alicia Wise, Clocks Executive Director, reports this gap is widening over time. Ironically, the publishers many librarians consider rapacious are paying for an archive that upholds traditional library values and protects content access for future readers. After more than a quarter century, the Locks program continues to collect, to preserve, and to provide access to many, many genres of content. The business model has evolved, but the goals have persisted. I will now hand over to David to talk about the technology, which has also evolved and persisted.
Good. So the power imbalance between publishers and their customers is of long standing, and it especially affects the academic literature. Simplistic application of web technology drove a change from purchasing a copy of the content to renting access to the publisher's copy. This greatly enhances the pre-existing power imbalance. Thus, in designing the Locks system, we face 3 challenges: to model for the web the way libraries worked on paper, to somehow do so within the constraints of contract law and copyright, and to ensure that the system cost was negligible compared to subscription costs. From a system engineering viewpoint, what struck me about Vicky's description of the paper library system was that libraries' circulating collections form a model, fault-tolerant, decentralized system. It's highly replicated and exploits this to deliver a service that's far more reliable than any individual component. There's no single point of failure, no central control to be subverted. The desired behavior of the system as a whole emerges as the participants take action in their own local interests and cooperate in ad hoc, informal ways. As the system I envisage on the hike would consist of a lockbox at each library, the digital analog of the stacks, that would hold the content the library had purchased. It would need these characteristics of the paper system. It would allow libraries to collect material to which they subscribe from the web. It would allow libraries' readers to access the material they'd collected. It would allow them to preserve their collections against the multiple frailties of digital information, and it would allow libraries to cooperate, the analog of interlibrary loan and copy. The collect part was both conceptually simple and mostly off the shelf. Since the journals were paywalled, as with paper, each library had to collect its own subscription content. But collecting content is what web browsers do. When they fetch content from a URL, they don't just display it, they store it in a cache on local storage. They can redisplay it without refetching it. The system needed a browser-like Hotel California cache that never got flushed, and a web crawler like those of search engines, so that all the library's subscribed content would end up in the cache. Because we lacked the first sale rights, the crawler had to operate with permission from the publisher, which took the form of a statement on their website. No permission, no collection. The access part was also conceptually simple and mostly off the shelf. Readers should see the content from the publisher unless it wasn't available. Their lockbox should act as a transparent web proxy, forwarding requests to the publisher, and if the response were negative, responding with the cached copy. The preserve part was conceptually simple, just don't remove old content from the cache on disk, but it was more of a problem to implement for three reasons. Disks are not 100% reliable in the short term and are 0% reliable over library timescales. Over time, content in the cache would get corrupted or lost. Because libraries were under budget pressure and short of IT resources, the hardware of the lockbox had to be cheap and thus not specially reliable. And content in the cache would be seen by humans only in exceptional circumstances, so detecting corruption or loss could not depend upon humans. Cooperation provided the solution to the problems of preservation. We expected considerable overlap between libraries' subscriptions. Thus, each journal would be collected by many libraries, just as in the paper system. The lockboxes at each library subscribing to each journal could compare their versions, voting on it in a version of the standard Byzantine fault tolerance algorithm. A library that lost a vote could repair their damaged copy from another library. The goal of stewardship drove Locke's approach to preservation. Given a limited budget and a realistic range of threats, data survives better in many cheap, unreliable, loosely coupled replicas than in a single expensive, durable one. Our initial vision for the system was reasonably simple, but no plan survives contact with the enemy, and so it was as we developed the system and deployed it in production. Now for some lessons from this process that are broadly applicable. In January 1995, the idea that the long-term survival of digital information was a significant problem was popularized by Jeff Rothenberg's Scientific American article, Ensuring the Longevity of Digital Documents. Rothenberg's concept of a digital document was of things like Microsoft Word files on a CD, individual objects encoded in a format private to a particular application. His concern was that the rapid evolution of these applications would eventually make it impossible to access the content of objects in that format. He was concerned with interpreting the bits. He essentially assumed that the bits would survive. But 30 years ago next month, an event signaled that Rothenberg's concerns had been overtaken by events. Stanford pioneered the transition of academic publishing from paper to the web when Highwire Press put the Journal of Biological Chemistry on the web. Going forward, the important information would be encoded in web formats such as HTML and PDF, Because each format with which Rothenberg was concerned was defined by a single application, it could evolve quickly. But web formats were open standards implemented in multiple applications. In effect, they were network protocols and thus evolve at a glacial pace. The rapid evolution of Rothenberg's digital documents had effectively stopped because they were no longer being created and distributed in that way. Going forward, there would be a static, legacy set of documents in these formats. Libraries and archives would need tools for managing those they acquired, and eventually emulation, the technique Rothenberg favored, would provide them. But by then it turned out that unless information was on the web, almost no one cared about it. Thus, the problem of digital preservation was the survival of the bits, aggravated by the vast scale of the content to be preserved. In May of the following year, 2004, Paul Evan Peters awardee Brewster Kahle established the Internet Archive to address the evanescence of web pages. This was the first digital preservation system to face the problems of scale. Next year, the archive will have collected 1 trillion web pages. The LOX system, like the Wayback Machine, was a system for ensuring the survival of and access to the bits of web pages in their original format. This was a problem. The conventional wisdom in the digital preservation community was that the sine qua non of digital preservation was defending against format obsolescence. Neither Kahle nor we saw any return in investing in format metadata or format migration. We both saw scaling up to capture more than a tiny fraction of the at-risk content as the goal. Events showed we were right, but at the time, the digital preservation community viewed LOX with great skepticism as not real digital preservation. The LOX team repeatedly made the case that preserving web content was a different problem from preserving Rothenberg's digital documents, and thus that applying the entire apparatus of preservation metadata, premise, fits, Jove, and format normalization to web content was an ineffective waste of scarce resources. Despite this, the drumbeat that LOX wasn't real digital preservation continued. After 6 years, the LOX team lost patience and devoted the necessary effort to implement a capability that they were sure would never be used in practice. The team implemented, demonstrated, and in 2005 published transparent, on-demand format migration of web content preserved in the LOX network. This was possible because the specification of the HTTP protocol that underlies the web supports the format metadata needed to render web content. If it lacked such metadata, web browsers wouldn't be possible. The continuing criticism continued unabated. There have been a number of services based instead upon emulation, the technique Rothenberg preferred. Importantly, Ilya Kramer's Old Web Today uses emulation to show preserved web content as it did in a contemporaneous browser, not as it does in a modern browser. Around the 6th of December 1991, Paul Kunz at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center brought up the first US website. In a foreshadowing of future problems, its content was dynamic. It was a front end for querying databases. Although the page itself was static, clicking on the links potentially returned different content as the underlying database was edited. Cliff Lynch identified the problem that dynamic content posed for preservation. In 2001, he wrote, "Each presentation can be tailored for a specific recipient. Which recipient's presentation deserves to be preserved? Can we show a future recipient what they would have seen had they accessed the resource in the past?" 16 years later, Lynch was still flagging the same problem. The dynamic nature of web content proved irresistible to academic journal publishers, despite their content being intended as archival. They added features like citation and download counts, personalization, and, of course, advertisements to HTML pages and watermarked their PDFs. These were all significant problems for LOCKSS, which depended upon comparing the copies ingested by multiple LOCKSS boxes. The comparison process had to filter out the dynamic content elements. Maintaining the accuracy of doing so was a continual task. The fundamental problem is that the web does not support universal resource names, URNs, but only universal resource locators, URLs. A URN would specify what a resource would consist of. All that a URL specifies is from where a resource can be obtained. As with the first US web page, what content you obtain from a URL is unspecified and can be different or even unobtainable on every visit. The reason the web runs on URLs and not URNs is that the underlying Internet's addresses, both IP and DNS, only specify location. There have been attempts to implement a network infrastructure that would support what, not where, networking. Thus, you can think of this as BitTorrent, but at the transport, not at the content layer. The goal of digital preservation is to create one or more persistent, accessible replicas of the content to be preserved. In WAT networks, each copy has the same URN. In IP-based networks, each copy has a different URL. To access the replica requires knowing where it is. Thus, if the original of the preserved content goes away, links to it no longer resolved. Starting in 2017, Paul Evan-Peters awardee Herbert van der Sampel and others made a valiant effort to solve this problem with Memento. Accepting the fact that persistent replicas of content at a URL at different times would have different URLs, they provided an HTTP-based mechanism for discovering the URL of the replica close to a desired time. In some cases, such as wikis, the original website implements the discovery mechanism and the underlying timeline. In other cases, such as the Wayback Machine, the site holding the replicas implements the timeline. Since there are likely to be multiple web archives with replicas of a given URL, Memento in practice depends upon aggregator services to provide a unified timeline of the replica space. In WAT networks, there would still be a need to provide an aggregated timeline, not discovering the URL of a replica from a desired time, but discovering its URN. Just as in the web, they would depend upon a mechanism above the transport layer to connect the names into a timeline. Thus, despite its theoretical appeal, WAT networking's practical advantages are less than they appear. In 1994, Lynch had described how lots of copies keep stuff safe in the paper world. Compare this with how we summarized library's role in our first major paper on LOCKSS, permanent web publishing. We said, acquire lots of copies, scatter them around the world so that it's easy to find some of them and hard to find all of them. Lend or copy your copies when other librarians need them. Because we were modeling the paper library system, we hoped that the LOCKSS system would obtain the benefits of a decentralized system over a centralized one performing the same function, which in the paper system and in theory are significant. After a couple of my prototypes proved to be insecure, I worked with a group of amazing Stanford CS PhD students to design a decentralized peer-to-peer network secured by proof of work. The 2003 paper describing it won Best Paper at the prestigious Symposium on Operating System Principles. This was 5 years before Satoshi Nakamoto published his decentralized peer-to-peer network secured by proof of work. Unfortunately, in the digital world, it is extraordinarily difficult to reap the theoretical benefits of decentralization. I laid out the reason why this is so a decade ago in Economies of Scale in Peer-to-Peer Networks. In brief, the mechanism described by W. Brian Arthur in his 1994 book, Increasing Returns and Path Dependence in the Economy, operates. Technology markets have very strong increasing returns to scale. The benefits of participating in a decentralized digital system increase faster than the costs, which drive centralization. 30 years later, Arthur's work explains today's web perfectly. The fundamental problem is that most layers in the software stack are highly concentrated, starting with the 3 operating systems. Network effects and economies of scale apply at every layer. The LOX system was designed and implemented to be completely decentralized. It was permissionless. Nodes could join and leave the network as they liked. We designed the network protocol to be extremely simple, both to avoid security flaws and also in the hope that there would be multiple implementations, avoiding single points of failure. There were a number of reasons why, over time, it turned out much less decentralized than we hoped. First, although we always paid a lot of attention to the security of LOX boxes, we understood that a software monoculture was vulnerable to software supply chain attacks. But it turned out that the things a LOX box needed to do other than just handling the protocol were quite complex. So despite our best efforts, we ended up with a software monoculture. Second, we hoped that by using the BSD open source license, we would create a diverse community of developers. But we overestimated the expertise and resources of the library community, so Stanford provided the overwhelming majority of the programming effort. And third, Don Waters was clear that grant funding could not provide the long-term sustainability needed for digital preservation. So he provided a matching grant to fund the transition from being funded by the system's users. This also transitioned the system to being permissioned as a way to ensure that the users paid. Although many small and open access publishers were happy to allow LOX to preserve their content, the oligopoly publishers never were. Eventually, they funded a completely closed network of huge systems at major libraries around the world called CLOCKS. This is merely the biggest of a number of closed private LOX networks that were established to serve specific genres of content, such as government documents. Monoculture risk is pervasive throughout the stacks of digital preservation systems. For example, for very good reasons, almost all are based on x86 hardware and an open source stack, starting with the Linux kernel. These very good reasons outweigh the benefits of diversity in the stack. And of course, the problem of monoculture risk is generic throughout IT due to the network effects and economies of scale described by Brian Arthur. It's especially worrying in an era of zero-day vulnerabilities and sophisticated software supply chain attacks, such as the recent $1.5 billion heist from Bybit. We have already warned you against 3 seductive but impractical ideas: format migration, WAT networking, and decentralization. My parting gift to you is to stop you wasting time on another seductive but impractical idea, that the solution to digital preservation is quasi-immortal media. What follows is an extract from a talk at Berkeley last month. What's a useful definition of archival data? It's data that can no longer earn its keep on readily accessible storage. Thus, the fundamental design goal for archival storage is to reduce cost by tolerating increased access latency. Data is archived, that is, moved to an archival storage system to save money. Archiving is an economic rather than a technical issue. The mainstream media occasionally comes out with an announcement, like this from the Daily Mail in 2013, or this from the New Yorker last month. Note the extrapolation from a 26-second excerpt to every film and TV program ever created in a teacup. 6 years later, this is a picture of, as far as I know, the only right-to-read DNA storage drive ever demonstrated. From the Microsoft University of Washington team that has done much of the research in DNA storage. It cost about $10,000 and took 21 hours to write and then read 5 bytes. The technical press is equally guilty. The canonical article about some development in the lab starts with the famous IDC graph projecting the amount of data that will be generated in the future. It goes on to describe the amazing density some research team achieved by writing, say, a megabyte into their favorite medium in the lab, and how this density could store all the world's data in a teacup forever. This conveys 5 false impressions. First, that there is some possibility that the researchers could scale their process up to a meaningful fraction of IDC's projected demand, or even to the microscopic fraction of the projected demand that makes sense to archive. There is no such possibility. Archival media is a much smaller market than regular media. IBM's Georg Lahoff and Gary M. Decad's slide shows that the size of the market in dollar terms decreases downwards. LTO tape, the favorite current archival medium, is less than 1% of the media market in dollar terms and less than 5% in capacity terms. Second, that the researcher's favorite medium could make it into the market in the timescale of IDC's projections. Because the reliability and performance requirements of storage media are so challenging, timescales in the storage market are much longer than the industry's marketeers like to suggest. Take, for example, Seagate's development of the next generation of hard disk technology, HAMR, where research started 26 years ago. 9 years later, in 2008, they published this graph showing HAMR entering the market in 2009. 17 years later, it is only now starting to be shipped to the hyperscalers. Research on data in silica started 15 years ago. Research on the DNA medium started 36 years ago. Neither is within 5 years of market entry. Third, that even if the researcher's favorite medium did make it into the market, it would be a product that consumers could use. As Kestutis Patergiannis figured out at Facebook more than a decade ago, because the systems that surround archival media rather than the media themselves are the major cost, the only way to make the economics of archival storage work is to do it at data center scale, but in warehouse space, and harvest the synergies that come from not needing data center power, cooling, staffing, and so on. Storage has an analog of Moore's law called Kreider's law, which states that over time the density of bits on a storage medium increases exponentially. Given the need to reduce costs at data center scale, Kreider's law limits the service life of even quasi-immortal media. As we see with tape robots, where data is routinely migrated to newer, denser media long before its theoretical lifespan, what matters is the economic and not the technical lifespan of a medium. Fourth, that anyone either cares or even knows what medium their archived data lives on. Only the hyperscalers do. Consumers believe their data is safe in the cloud. Why bother backing it up, let alone archiving it, if it's safe anyway? If anyone really cares about archiving, they use a service such as Glacier, where they definitely have no idea what medium is being used. And finally, the idea that that with quasi-immortal media, you don't need lots of copies to keep stuff safe. Media such as silica, DNA, quartz DVDs, steel tape, and so on address bit rot, which is only one of the threats to which long-lived data is subject. Clearly, a single copy on such media is still subject to threats, including fire, flood, earthquake, ransomware, and insider attacks. Thus, even an archive needs to maintain multiple copies. This greatly increases the cost, bringing us back to the economic threat. The reason why this focus on media is a distraction is that the cost per terabyte of the medium is irrelevant. What drives the economic threat is the capital and operational cost of the system. It's only by operating at data center scale and thus amortizing the capital and operational costs over very large amounts of data that the system costs per terabyte can be made competitive. The fundamental idea behind LOCKSS was that, given a limited budget and a realistic range of threats, Data would survive better in many cheap, unreliable, loosely coupled replicas than in a single, expensive, durable one. When giving talks about locks, Vicky and I often used to feel like the sergeant in Alice's Restaurant, who spoke for 45 minutes and nobody understood a word he said. We hope that this time you did better. And let's see if we did as we answer your questions. And we do have plenty of time for questions, so have at it. Oh, Brewster.
How much is in locks and how much is in clocks?
Oh, Brewster asked how much is in locks and how much is in clocks. And you're asking the wrong people. We haven't had anything to do with this for more than 7 years. I do know that the clocks boxes had to be upgraded recently because they ran out of storage. And they are these big 48 drive boxes full of state-of-the-art hard drives. So if they're up to like 20, I know they were upgraded like a year or so ago. So that's each of them is like 48 times 15 terabyte drives probably. So they're quite big. Yeah, I think that the message is that we were right that you need lots of copies. And the problem with that is that people need to step up and have the copies. And that's difficult. And we certainly tried to make it as easy as possible, but we underestimated how difficult it was going to be. And apparently, Brewster says that Don Waters has a law which he says it wasn't his originally, but was Bill Bowen's, which is that if something's free, libraries won't do it. It has to be something that they pay for in order to get them to do it. I said, I wish we had understood that at the beginning. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, David. That was wonderful. I want to thank David and Vicki for a wonderful talk and congratulate them again on a well-deserved, much-deserved award for an amazing development and contribution. And thank you also to Andrew for his update, to Dawn for stepping in and introducing our PEP Award winners. I think we will give you a little bit of extra time to connect, catch up, rest, refresh before we launch into the first parallel rounds. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great meeting. Take care.